I'm a male living in South Korea. My cousin, Nari, used to be an Airbnb hostess here in Seoul. The site's become massive. There's something like 2 million properties listed on it, so no matter where you're traveling to in the world, chances are that there's somebody with a room or a condo or even an entire house to rent. During her time hosting, Nari met a whole bunch of colourful characters. There were the sweet older couple that came to stay with her 8 times while visiting friends in the city. There was the guy who insisted on bringing his dog with him, this little rat-sized chihuahua that was about half the size of my cat's. There were a few people who were high maintenance, and there were a few who were really chilled, and ended up joining us for drinks at the bar down the street. I never hosted personally, but I'd help Nari out with her bookings if she had to work late and needed someone to meet her guests. Well, for all the good people, there was Mr. Park. He was this creepy, balding guy that stayed with Nari for a week while he was in town on business. At least, he said that was his reason anyway. I think we were both relieved when he left. I'd met him once, and didn't like the vibe I got off the guy, and there wasn't much she could do to kick him out early or anything, lest he gave her a bad review and dropped her score on the site. After he left, Nari discovered a weird plastic thing he had left in the shower. Turns out, he had left his slimy, fake vagina masturbation aid sitting next to her soap. I took one look and had to explain to her what it was. I remember her picking it up in a plastic bag, like the way people scoop up dog shit on the street. From then on, Nari was pretty picky when it came to who she let stay. One weekend, Nari had to leave for a business trip, so she left me the spare key. She had a booking coming up, a young woman named Sumi, and I was to play host. We'll just call her Sue from here. Sue checked in, got the key from me, and put her suitcase in the spare room. I didn't see any more of her that Friday, or for the rest of the weekend, and I figured she was out enjoying herself. Not too long after that, I could have sworn I saw Mr. Park in our local grocery store. Same balding head, same vibe, but he was at one end of the aisle and I the other. I got that feeling like I was being watched, but when I looked directly, he was gone. At the time, I shrugged it off, figured it had to be some other balding guy, and I was just projecting my anxiety. Now, the building I live in is fairly old, which means that the walls are pretty thick, and noise tends to only travel in the hallway. If I'm waiting for the elevator, I can occasionally hear someone's TV if it's really loud, but that's about it. That Monday morning, I was woken up far too early by a pounding sound. It was maybe 6 or 6:30 in the morning, and the sun was barely up. At that point, I was pissed. I threw on a housecoat and yanked open the front door without bothering to look in the peephole. I was greeted by 2 very tense policemen. They asked for my name, and if I knew the young woman who lived across the hall from me, pointing to Nari's apartment. Without thinking, I ran across the hall and through the open door, just knowing in my gut that Nari was supposed to be returning that morning, and that something must be wrong if there were police at my door. The cops yelled for me to wait, but I was on autopilot. At first, I thought someone had robbed the place. Her TV was smashed, her couch was ripped apart like it had been mauled by a bear, her photos were buried under broken glass, her laptop had practically melted into the floor. And then I realized, in some part of my brain, that her TV and laptop wouldn't be here if it was a simple robbery. And that's when I smelled it. Death has a certain stench to it. Sometimes, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, like a hospital corridor, you'll get a whiff of it. What I smelled was a full-on, closed-handed fist slug into the face. In a panic, I couldn't stop myself. I flung open the first bedroom door. Nari's room looked just like the living room, but she wasn't in it. By this time, the officers had caught up with me, and were trying to steer me back out of the unit, but I broke free of their grasp and flung open the spare bedroom door. Inside was what was left of Sue. We get so desensitized to violence on TV that when we're actually confronted with it in real life, it seems almost absurd, like it's totally unreal. She had literally been torn to shreds with a knife. Just from smelling the air alone, I could taste that metallic flavor of blood in the back of my mouth. I showered several times a day for the next week and could not get that taste, that smell out of my hair or skin. It turns out that Sue had been there since Friday night. Nari got home a few hours later. By that time, the forensics team had already been in and out and were starting to clean up the scene. I couldn't tell her about what I'd seen. I just remember hugging her. While investigating, the police had found a second set of keys. This meant there was actually a third set of keys to Nari's place, and those keys had prints. 3 guesses as to who they traced back to. Mr. Park. Park had made a set of keys while staying at Nari's, and he wasn't here on business as he had claimed. It turns out he lived about 15 minutes outside of the city. Security camera footage showed him coming into the building that Friday night, and him lurking around outside for the past month prior to that, just after his stay. Surprisingly, Park confessed to the murder, said he didn't know that Nari would be out of town, that he hadn't known she had had a guest that weekend. His wife had recently left him and taken the kids with her, and Nari reminded him of a younger version of his wife. Nari and I have both moved buildings since then. I still can't believe that all of this came because of broken trust. By giving a stranger a safe place to stay, by letting him into her home, this person was so twisted that he thought to make a copy of her key. If it had been any other weekend, Nari would have been at home, and what happened to Sue would have happened to her too. This is a story I didn't personally experience. I was told it by a good friend of mine, Yori, and it takes place in Fukuoka many years ago. It's a pretty wild tale, but Yori's not the kind of guy to just make something like this up. Every time he tells it, he speaks with conviction and sincerity, and I for one totally believe him. In his youth, he had a friend called Takeshi. Now this guy was a real rebel by Japanese standards, especially back in the day. For example, his favorite pastime was apparently getting drunk and then going to a pinsaron. Pinsarons are basically blowjob clubs. Sometimes he'd get all the guys drunk, Yori included, and drag them all along to this dominatrix bar. Ever the showman, Takeshi liked to get on stage and have beautiful women drip hot wax on his body. Yori's got a million of these stories, so his old rebellious chum must have been quite fun to be around. As their group of friends got older, they all started to mature. All of them, that is, except for Takeshi. He still went out pretty much nightly. Considering Takeshi's lifestyle, it didn't surprise Yori all that much when he told him about his new girlfriend, a girl he had met at a strip club. Her name was Miku. It's not like they happened to just bump into each other. She was actually one of the strippers at this place called Asobi, and they met while she gave him a lap dance. Now, if you think that dating a stripper sounds like a bad idea, then you're a lot smarter than Takeshi was. What the poor guy failed to realize was that Asobi was run by the Yakuza, pretty much the Japanese mafia. These guys are no joke, and even wannabe tough guys like Takeshi knew better than to meddle in their affairs. Problem was, he had been hanging around with Miku for the past 2 weeks before she dropped this bombshell. According to Yori, Miku was crazy. Like real stripper crazy. She was also totally obsessed with Takeshi, and would momentarily lose her mind if she even saw him glance in the direction of another girl. Or, God forbid, if one tried to talk to him. Takeshi was a good-looking guy, so this happened more than once. He'd have to pry her off them, kicking and screaming. Then, as quickly as she had lost her shit, she'd zen out and be totally normal again. Takeshi had been thinking about cutting things off with her since she was just major trouble. This new Yakuza development pushed him to do so. He dumped her as soon as she told him, calling her crazy, a mental train wreck, and that even though she was hot, she was nowhere near hot enough to risk a Yakuza beating. She went ballistic, right there in the middle of the street, with everyone standing around. Said that she didn't want her boyfriend to say such horrible things about her, but that if he apologized, she'd forgive him because she just loved him that much. If he didn't apologize, she'd make sure he never called her such things again. She'd make him eat those words. He told her where to stick it, turned his back on her and walked away. In Takeshi's head, that was the end of it. That night, Takeshi went out for some drinks with the guys to celebrate being a free man again. Told them all about Miku's Yakuza ties and how he had just dodged a real bullet. He joked about how she had gone crazy in the street. Well, Yuri and the guys warned him to stay safe. Miku was unstable after all. Brushing off their concern, Takeshi stumbled home and into bed. In the early hours of the morning, a visitor came knocking. It was Miku, and she wasn't alone. A couple of Yakuza goons held down Takeshi, while Miku produced a pair of scissors. The gangsters wrenched Takeshi's mouth open and pulled out his tongue. "I warned you this would happen, my love," she said. "I just hate it when you say such horrible things." With the pair of scissors in one hand, Miku held his tongue tight and went to work. Turns out she was a girl of her word, and Takeshi really was forced to eat his. He developed a bit of a speech impediment after that, as you can probably imagine. With the police not willing to get involved in Yakuza business, Takeshi was left up shit creek without a paddle. Miku actually wanted to keep their relationship going, and what Miku wanted, Miku got. Yori said that Takeshi wasn't about to roll over and become some sort of boyfriend slave. Through gargled words, he told him that he planned on getting rid of Miku, one way or another. I asked Yori if he was successful or not. He said he didn't know. Takeshi went missing not long after, and nobody ever heard from him again. Miku suddenly stopped working at Asobi, and the police only half-heartedly looked into the case. The way Yori sees it, 3 things could have happened to Takeshi. Scenario 1. He used his brain for once in his life, took his car and fled the city, started a new life somewhere. Scenario 2. The Yakuza got to him and took him out to the hills, buried him in a deep grave, hopefully not still alive. Or Scenario 3. The Yakuza got to him with Miku, and are keeping him somewhere as her plaything. He really hopes it's not that last one. Two months after my brother and his wife bought a new house, they had to go out of town and needed their cats fed. Their house and my office are both a good drive from my apartment, but only a few minutes from each other. My brother said if I wanted, I could just stay over in the guest room rather than driving among the 3 places. So I got the keys and instructions and planned to stay there for 3 nights, Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. Monday evening was uneventful until around midnight. I was lying on the living room couch watching Conan with a cat lying on my chest. I started to drift off to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was standing in pitch black darkness. I completely freaked out. I had no idea where I was. I felt around in the dark and felt nothing. Finally, I realized there actually was a faint blue light coming from above. I moved towards it, and then understood where I was. I was in the fucking basement. The light was coming through the basement door at the top of the stairs, which leads into the kitchen. Just enough moonlight apparently made it through from a window elsewhere in the kitchen. I bolted up the stairs, turned on the kitchen light, and closed the basement door. I was terrified until I calmed myself down enough to come to the conclusion you probably already came to. I had sleepwalked all the way down the stairs after opening the basement door, which I know was closed. A couple of things are important to this story. First, the basement. The house was very nice. Actually, more than they should have been able to afford. The only exception was the basement. I'd only seen the basement once when I'd first got the tour. It was totally unfinished, and was the one major thing they wanted to fix up. All they had down there were boxes and the washer-dryer. I had no reason to want to go down there, and had kind of forgotten it even existed. The other point is that sleepwalking is kind of a thing in my family, almost an inside joke. My brother talked in his sleep constantly, and would sleepwalk sometimes. It always scared the hell out of me. The idea of people doing things in their sleep just creeps me out to the core. Still does. My brother knew this and would tease me about it, so it was known in my family that I had this phobia, but as far as I know, I had never, ever sleepwalked until that night. The image kept playing in my mind over and over of me asleep, getting up from the couch, walking to the kitchen, opening up the basement door, and shuffling down the stairs in total darkness. Creepy as all hell. Anyway, I saw the TV was still on in the living room, playing The Wedding Crashers. I watched the rest of the movie, trying to laugh and think of the sleepwalking as a funny story to tell my brother. When I went upstairs to go to sleep in the guest room, I stayed asleep. That was night one. The next morning, in the light of day, it didn't seem that scary. I texted my brother about it and joked around. All day, I wasn't bothered one bit, but as I'm walking out of my office to my car, I'm overcome by this sense of dread. All of a sudden, the thought of going to sleep in that house, and maybe sleepwalking again, is scaring the hell out of me. So I had a plan. I stop at the hardware store and pick up one of those rubber door stopper wedges. At the house, I jam this into the crack under the basement door and kick it until it's as far as it can go. I test it out, trying to open the door, and it won't budge. Perfect. Later, I go upstairs and fall asleep. When I wake up, I swear to God I think I'm dreaming. I was standing in darkness again, but this time I know exactly where I am. The smell is the same. The concrete floor under my feet is the same. I look around for the light from upstairs, and it takes me longer to find it because it's farther away. Last night I was only a couple of feet from the stairs. This night it was maybe 10 feet. I run up and turn on the kitchen lights. I see the rubber wedge on the floor, a couple of feet away, as if it was tossed there. Again, I can't stop picturing myself sleepwalking. Out of the bedroom, down the stairs, trying to open the basement door, bending down and yanking out the wedge, and then, again, slowly down into the darkness. I decided I was turning on the basement lights and they were staying on. I opened the door and flipped the switch to the basement stairway. I saw there was a main switch at the bottom of the stairs. To give you a quick sense of the layout, the staircase splits the basement into two parts. To the right is a small area with the washer-dryer, and to the left is the big open area. I walked down and turned on the lights for the whole basement. That's when I noticed something I hadn't when my brother gave me the tour. About 10 to 15 feet away, in the big area, there was a door to what looked like a small closet. This door was closed, but had no doorknob, just an empty hole, so it looked like it would freely swing open. I realized it was very close to where I had just awoken. Then a fucking freaky thought came to me. It was as if each night I was heading to the door and getting a little farther each time before I woke up. As soon as that thought popped into my head, I booked it up the stairs again, left the lights on, and closed the door. I went up to the bedroom, but it took me forever to fall asleep. That was night 2. The next morning, Wednesday morning, I woke up late for work. I didn't think about the basement at all because I was scrambling to get ready. At work though, I was still curious about what was behind the door, so I texted my brother and asked. He replied, "Wait, why were you in the basement?" I realized that when I texted him the day before, I never actually told him where I woke up, so I tell him I woke up in the basement, actually twice in a row. After a while, he sends this novel-length text. It was about how the basement is creepy, and not to go down there, etc. How they tried putting the litter boxes in the basement, and the cats made a mess in the house because they refused to go down there. How he volunteers to do every chore other than the laundry, just so he doesn't have to go down there. He says all this stuff, and it's surprising to me, because my brother never believed in the paranormal or superstitions, not even when we were kids. I also realize he never answered my question about the door, but I let it go. After work, I get the same feeling of dread as I'm walking to my car. I really don't want to stay there again, and I decide, fuck it, I don't have to. So I go and feed the cats, get my stuff, and drive back to my place. I'm supposed to feed the cats one more time, so I'll stop over in the morning. As I went to sleep at my apartment, I was thinking of all the steps I'd have to take to sleepwalk to the basement again. Find my car parked around the block, drive asleep to my brother's house, etc. But this time, I sleep through the night. That was night 3. Thursday morning, I stop at the house as planned. I'm about to leave when I remember that the basement lights are still on. I don't even hesitate to go down there and turn them off. There was something about being there in the morning that, at the time, made it seem fine. When I go down, again, that door without a doorknob catches my eye, and it doesn't even seem scary anymore. So, what the hell, let's see. I walk over to it, and I distinctly remember not feeling spooked at all. That is, until I reach my hand towards the doorknob hole to pull it open. As soon as I do that, and I mean instantly, I feel this electric feeling, like the air before a storm, and I imagine a hand coming through the hole and grabbing mine. It was like 0 to 60, going from no fear to being certain something horrible would happen if I opened the door. It's hard to describe it other than that electric feeling. I booked it up the stairs and out of the house. So, a month later, I meet my brother for happy hour. A few drinks in, we start joking about me sleepwalking and the creepy basement. I say he never answered me about what was behind the door, and he says I don't want to know, joking at first, but then, as I persist, he gets more serious, insisting that I really don't want to know. Finally, he tells me, and I don't believe him. He's my big brother, and he's only bullshitted me 1,000,000 times in the past. This was his explanation. The previous and first owners of the house had a teen daughter that used the basement as her bedroom. The door was to her closet, where one night she curled up, took some pills, and killed herself. The family was going to remodel the basement, but after tearing it apart, realized they couldn't do it and had to move. That was why only the basement was unfinished, and why my brother was able to afford the place. The seller had to disclose a suicide happened in the residence. He said if I didn't believe him, to look up the market values of the identical houses in his tract. I know how much they paid for their house, and it was way lower. He and his wife considered themselves rational people, and figured it was a bargain, but they still didn't want to tell anyone. After they moved in, His wife was fine with the basement, but he grew to hate it. He apologized for not saying anything to me before I stayed there, but he never thought I'd have any reason to go down there. Now, here's what convinced me. I said, okay, the only thing that makes me kind of believe you is that last morning I was there, and I went over to the closet door. At this point, I see my brother's face change. I continued. When I went over to it, the air felt like, and at that same instant, I say, electricity, and my brother says, electric, at the same exact time. I saw his face and knew he was telling the truth. I've never stepped foot again in that basement, and I haven't sleepwalked since. In March of 2003, back when I was 17 years old, my younger brother and I took a weekend camping trip up to Los Padres National Forest. We'd gone there many times with our family for day camping, swimming, and just lounging around. This time though, we went alone for a 2-night camping trip at our favourite spot. It's a place that most locals simply refer to as the Gorge. We'll never forget that weekend, but for all the wrong reasons. We got there Saturday morning at around 9 AM and hiked the 5 miles out to the Gorge. The Gorge is a large swimming hole with a huge 60-foot rock cliff boulder that visitors love to jump from into the deep water below. The jumping rock cliff is very steep, and you have to jump in a very specific location to ensure that you don't hit the rocks protruding from the wall face. The Gorge has many primitive camping areas, and is overall a beautiful yet isolated place. The first day was very fun, and after a long day of swimming, catching crawdads, jumping from rocks, and just relaxing, we set up our tent, made a fire, and ate our cans of SpaghettiOs and a few crawdads we had cooked for dinner. Towards the end of our dinner, we were visited by a large group of students who were camping farther down the river. They stated that they were students from the Bay Area, and had a few nights left in their almost 2-week-long school camping trip. We offered them some of our chips and snacks, and chatted with them for a bit before they made their hike back to their camping spot. It soon got dark, and my brother and I got ready for bed. My brother was 2 years younger than me, and had a deep fear of isolation, so we slept in the same tent, and agreed that we'd keep our fire burning the entire night to ease his anxieties. We put 5 large logs on the fire, and crept inside our tent and got in our sleeping bags. We both fell asleep very fast, as we were exhausted from the day. Around 2:30 in the morning, we're both awoken by a large splash of water near our tent that puts out our fire. We heard no voices, and couldn't see much from inside our tent. We froze in terror. My brother began to cry, and I tried to calm him down. I told him I'd go outside and investigate, and that everything would be okay. Said our water bladder must have fallen from the tree where it was hung, and that I'm sure it's some kind of coincidence. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped our tent, and stepped outside. I pointed the flashlight over to the fire pit, and saw 4 large men sitting around our fireplace, all staring at me with what I can only describe as expressionless faces. It appeared as though they had slit open our 2-gallon water bladder and tossed it into our fire. I was in shock and didn't know what to say. For about 5 seconds, none of them said anything. We just stared at each other. Then, in a very drunk voice, one of them said, "Get your pussy friend out here too." I then heard my brother hyperventilating and screaming and crying in our tent in a way that made me feel so helpless. I had no weapons, and my brother and I were outnumbered 2 to 1. I asked the men what they wanted, and told them that we could just leave, and that we were sorry if we were taking their camping spot or invading their area. They ignored my questions, and just stood up. That's when I see that 2 of the 4 men were holding something in their hands. They were long, sword-shaped in appearance, like a machete or a short sword, but they looked homemade, primitive, The men yelled at us to get up and to bring our pussy asses with them. I thought for a second that these might be drunken rangers, merely mad at us for having too big of a fire. But once I glanced at their clothing and saw their baggy jeans and their black and grey hoodies, I knew we weren't so lucky. I had heard in the past that drug dealers and Mexican cartels had been caught hiding their marijuana plants in the forest, and wondered if these men were of a similar breed, and somehow felt like we were a threat to their crops. We were in fear for our lives. The men didn't touch us or directly threaten us with violence, but the threat was definitely implied in their tone, and I knew we didn't have any choice in the matter. We followed the lead male while the other 3 men fell back behind us. My brother put his hand on my shoulder and was visibly shaking. He then whispered to me that they were walking us in the direction of the 60-foot rock cliff and that we needed to run. I was petrified and hadn't been paying attention to where they were leading us, but when he said it, I realized he was right. I stopped dead in my tracks and said to the men, "What are you gonna do to us?" The lead male said in a very slurred voice, "Nothing. We're just gonna have some fun with you pussies." I felt like we really had no choice but to do what they said, and hope that they were merely screwing with us, and that this would all be over soon. After about 30 seconds of walking, we arrived at the jumping spot on top of the boulder overlooking the gorge swimming area. One of the men then asked, "Have you guys ever jumped from here?" I told them yes, I had, but my brother hadn't, as it was a pretty high jump, and was very dangerous for most people due to the height of the rocks below. The men laughed, and again called my brother a pussy. I told them we weren't pussies, but it just wasn't safe to do it in the dark. The men then formed a half circle around us, and one of them said, "I wanna see. Show us you're not a bunch of pussies." I screamed at them that it was too dangerous at night, and that during the day it was dangerous enough. I told them that there are many rocks down there that you have to avoid, and that if you don't jump precisely correctly, the jump will kill you. I pleaded and pleaded. The men just laughed and took a few steps closer to us. I was beyond scared, and could hear my heart beating through my ears. My brother, by this point, was crying loudly and saying things I couldn't understand. He was beyond terrified, and so was I. I grabbed his hand and told him that we needed to get away from these men, and that we were in great danger. I told him I had jumped off the boulders into the water before, and knew where to jump, and that if he jumped with me, we'd be okay. I told him I'd use my flashlight to help guide us, and that I'd tell him where to put his feet and how far to jump. The men continued to laugh as we had our conversation, and showed zero humanity or pity. I held my brother's hand, and placed his feet onto a specific spot on the rock ledge, where I remembered jumping from last time I was there months before. I explained to him that I knew he was scared, and so was I, but that we needed to jump out as far as we possibly could, and slightly to the right, otherwise we'd hit the rocks. He was shaking, crying, and kept telling me that he couldn't do it. He then urinated on the floor. The men laughed and continued to berate us. I then told my brother we needed to jump now, and that he'd be okay if he listened to me. I told him that after we jumped, we'd swim to the shore on the right, and would hide in the bushes until daybreak, and go for help then. I then grabbed his hand tightly, and told him that once we hit the water, he needed to tuck his legs and arms in, so that they wouldn't get hurt from the impact of the water. I then instructed him that he needed to swim hard to the surface, as we'd sink pretty far down due to the height of the jump. I grabbed his hand, and we jumped. I pulled him hard with me to ensure that he'd be safe from the rocks below. We fell for what felt like a minute, but in reality was only a few seconds. My brother yelled all the way down in a way I've never heard another human being scream before. Terror, dread, and fear of imminent death reverberated from his voice. I felt helpless and almost forgot where we were for those few seconds. Then we hit the water. As soon as we hit, I lost my grip on my brother's hand, but I did hear a second impact in the water. I swam up towards the surface with all of my energy and took a deep breath. I then listened for my brother to surface, and heard nothing. I panicked and dove down into the water to try and grab him. Just as I dove, I felt his leg brush against my hand and realized he was about to surface. I swam up again and heard my brother. He was crying and kept saying that his arm had hit a rock on the way down and that he couldn't feel it. The men above were laughing again, and I heard one of them say, "They actually fucking made it. Those pussies." I then heard objects splashing in the water around us and realized that they were throwing beer bottles or rocks or some other hard objects at us. I quickly grabbed my brother by his shirt and helped him swim to the nearby shore. The whole time we swam, tons of objects landed dangerously close to us, and I remember thinking, if any of these hit us on the head, it's gonna kill us. I'd lost my flashlight during the fall, and we were in complete darkness. We reached the water's edge, and I pulled my brother to the shore. Objects continued to rain down around us, and we could hear the men yelling and laughing. I'd told my brother that we needed to run. He was crying, and he was holding his injured arm, which he still couldn't feel or use. It had a deep cut around the elbow, and even with just the starlight, we could see it was a serious injury. We stumbled down the tree line and began making our way through the darkness to one of the main trails, using only my memory as a guide. We fell again and again, and were cut by branches and rocks all over our bodies as we wandered about down the overgrown trail. Everything in my body told me to keep going and to get as far away from these men as we could. We walked for many minutes until we could no longer hear the men, and then we waited. I wrapped my brother's arm with my shirt and told him it was all over and that all we had to do now was wait until morning for help. We sat in that spot all night, and my brother cried and shook for hours. I just put my arm around him and patted his head, just like when we were children and he had a panic attack and our parents weren't around. At daybreak, we finally see the severity of his injuries. He had a deep gash in his arm, and his shoulder was obviously dislocated. I helped him hike up the nearby trail, and we walked all the way back to the base camp ranger station. We explained what had happened to the rangers, and they sent 2 armed officers to go and investigate the location. My brother was sent to a nearby hospital for treatment, and I joined him in the ambulance ride over. The rangers never found the men, but did retrieve most of our gear. The scary thing about this incident is that same week, 2 teenage boys were found dead at the bottom of the gorge jumping area. They had been a part of the school trip group we had met earlier. Their camping ground had been invaded by a group of people with similar machete-like objects who chased them off their camping spot. I'm glad to be alive, and my brother and I have never gone camping alone again, nor have we been back to the gorge. All we have left from the incident are the scars on my brother's arm, hospital bills, and a lot of trauma. An article about the death of the 2 teenage boys can be found in the description below. I can only hope that their deaths were accidents like the authorities ruled. I didn't find out about their deaths until 7 years later, but was horrified by the similar circumstances and the timing of the 2 events. When I was 14, our family dog, a German Shepherd named Benny, went missing. My older brother and I had taken him out for a walk in the Arizonan woods that surround our house. The dog disappeared out of eyeshot and didn't return when we called for him. Must have looked for a solid 3 hours before the sun started to set and we had to jog back to our house. We told our dad that Benny had disappeared on our usual walking trail. Well, old Benny was part of the family, so my dad and uncle went out with a couple of flashlights in search of him, reassuring my brother and I that they'd find him. Despite their reassurances, I honestly didn't hold out much hope. We live in the middle of nowhere, with vast woodland almost surrounding the house. Even though Benny knew this area like the back of his paw, if he'd wandered too far out in those woods, he could have easily lost his bearings. It's possible he caught sight of a critter and chased it too deep in. I was distressed, of course, because I loved that dog like a brother, and so did, well, my brother. We waited alone in the house for a couple more hours, anxiously awaiting our elder's return. It was a fair trek down to where we'd lost sight of him, but every minute we had to wait was disheartening. You can imagine my jubilation when I heard a dog's bark coming from the surrounding woods. My first assumption was that our uncle and dad had found him, but when I peered out of my bedroom window overlooking the front, I saw nothing. Our family members weren't anywhere to be seen. Had Benny found his way back by himself? Did I just imagine that barking? I called my brother over, telling him I just heard what must have been Benny out by the trees. As he stared out of the window beside me, a second bark rang out, much louder than the first. Actually, a little too loud. Being a German Shepherd, Benny had a strong bark, but this seemed almost unnatural, and almost seemed to reverberate. The tree line where it was coming from was a fair distance from the house, but it sounded like he was just outside the window. After an interval of a few seconds, another identical bark. It might sound odd to say this, since dog barks sound pretty alike, but it was almost too similar to the last one. There was a static quality to it, almost like an old recording. Then came a whimpering, like an injured dog would make. I knew that my brother thought this was strange as well, as he shot me an unnerved look, and told me to stay put whilst he went out with my dad's rifle to investigate. If Benny was hurt out there, we'd have to help him pronto. I kept a watchful eye and ear from my bedroom, and my brother ventured outside, cautiously approaching the tree line. About 10 meters away, I saw him freeze on the spot, shining his flashlight at a specific point in the woods. He lowered it and aimed his rifle at the same spot. All this time, I'm hollering at him from my bedroom window, asking what the hell's going on. He doesn't answer me, just stands there for the longest moment. Then he pulls a 180 and hightails it back inside. I ask him what the hell that was all about. He says that as he got close to the tree line, he saw old Benny all right, tail wagging and everything. Gave him a little, "Come here, boy." The dog wouldn't budge. It wanted my brother to go to him. When my brother shone his flashlight on Benny, he knew something wasn't right with the big guy. Aside from his moving tail, he was standing stiff and rigid, and looked more like a taxidermy statue. His sides didn't even expand or contract to breathe. And his eyes, they weren't dog-like. He said it was more like looking into the eyes of a human stranger. They were large, wide, and full of white. That might be difficult to picture, but he said you wouldn't have to know what Benny looked like to know this was unnatural for a dog. That's when he raised his rifle, and the damn thing stood up on its back legs and sprinted off deep into the woods, running just like a man. Since it looked like Benny, he couldn't take the shot. He claims to this day that the thing was trying to lure us out into those woods, projecting its voice and trying to catch us off guard, that it hadn't yet learned the little nuances of acting like an authentic dog. Our dad and uncle returned home about 15 minutes later. They'd found Benny's mauled body by a lake a couple of miles out. They said he must have been there for hours. I personally don't know who did this, but my grandma does. Back in the 70s, they had a family party. This guy put rat poison in a Coke bottle, back when they had those releasable metal caps. Then he left it in the fridge with the rest of the Cokes for whichever unlucky family member would drink it. My uncle was maybe 7 at the time, and he snuck it. The kids weren't allowed soda, so maybe whoever poisoned the cola didn't think a kid would end up with it. It ended up killing my uncle. My grandma lied about it, and I was always told some kid at school did it. My dad or his sister could have just as easily been the victims themselves, but they were too scared to drink the cola, fearing they'd get in trouble if their parents caught them. For years, I was convinced they might have been connected with the mob, since my family is Italian. That's just a hunch though. I think it was more of an arsehole way of playing Russian roulette with coke. Nothing ever came of it, and despite the fact it was her own son who died, my grandma never revealed the killer. Why that might be, I dunno. I'm assuming more than one person knows, but since she didn't do anything about it, no one said or did anything. This happened about 2 years ago when I was 19. My girlfriend, friends and I were travelling from London to Bangkok and had booked a cheap place to stay on Airbnb. It was situated down this creepy little alley that had no lights. It was a tight squeeze too, only about the width of one person. Eventually we get our act together and head down in single file and come to this really shoddy looking building. No, this can't be the place. We thought we'd booked an established house online, but this place was a shithole. It was small, run down, and shadier than Slim himself. But hey, it was super cheap, and we were all really tired from travelling, so we thought, screw it, we can put up with this for a few nights. The dude hosting us is there, waiting, and he's this creepy little guy. He offered us a few bottles of Coca-Cola, but the bottles were really dirty. It looked like they'd been used before, like they'd been left in the trash and refilled. We politely declined. There was something evidently wrong about this guy. He was this short little dude with a crooked smile and a hunched over back as well. Sort of reminded me of a jockey from Left 4 Dead if I'm honest. But it wasn't his appearance that made me wary. It was the way he was acting around the girls in our group, getting a little too close for comfort. He was thirsty for something other than dirty cola, I'll tell you that much. After a few choice glares, he leaves the keys with us and goes on his merry way, allowing us to enjoy our stay in peace. All of the double bedrooms were next door to one another. The rooms were tiny, and the air conditioning unit kept dripping on me during the night, but otherwise they were somewhat acceptable. So the next morning rolls around, and we all go to check out the sights. Around midday, I started getting some serious stomach problems, so decided to go back to the hotel with one of my friends, Helena. She'd been having trouble sleeping for a while, and wanted to try and get some rest. The two of us got back to the house. Helena's room was the one next to mine. She gave me a hug and went to take her nap. I spent about half an hour mucking around on my laptop when I decided to take a shower. Now the bathroom in my room was ridiculously small, and I'm a 6'2" guy, so there was barely any room to move. It had a shower, a toilet, and a sink all somehow squeezed inside. A claustrophobic's nightmare. There was also a little glazed window that didn't open. So I have my shower, and everything's hunky-dory. When I finish, I go to open the door, but it won't open. The door was somehow broken and jammed shut. I try for a good long while to open it, but it won't budge at all. I start banging on the wall, knowing that my friend is on the other side and should be able to hear me. But she doesn't. I bang even louder, and still nothing. These walls weren't thick, so I was confused as to why she couldn't hear me. I would have obviously have called my friends on my mobile, but all of my stuff was in the bedroom. About 30 minutes go by. Since there's no ventilation in the room, I'm feeling a little lightheaded from all of the steam from the hot shower. I tried to open up that shitty little window, But just like the door, it's sealed tighter than a bull's arsehole in fly season. All this time, I've been trying to get Helena's attention. About 2 hours in, I hear someone enter the room. Thank God, I think. She's finally heard me. I yell through the door and tell her to try and open it from the other side. But there's no response. Instead, I hear squeaking, like somebody's bouncing on the bed. Then I hear laughter. But it's not Helena. It's a man's voice. Who the hell's there? I shout, seriously hoping one of my friends had come back and was messing with me or something. The laughter stopped abruptly, and a man responded to me in Thai. I have no idea what he said, but from the tone of his voice, I knew it was something threatening. The laughter resumes immediately after he says this. Now, I don't know if this guy has a weapon, or even what he wants. If he was going to rob me, all of my stuff was already there for the taking. Why was he sticking around and laughing? This goes on for what must have been 10 minutes. And then, suddenly, dead silence. Had he left? It begins to dawn on me the reason Helena might not have been responding. I start trying to break down the door, but it's surprisingly sturdy, and despite my size, I'm far from athletic. Only a minute passes, and all of my friends return from sightseeing. I yell to my friend Ross to get me out. He tries to open it, but eventually it becomes clear the only way I'm getting out is by smashing down that door. So that's what we do. When I'm out, everybody's there, including Helena. Turns out she had just taken some sleeping pills and had fallen into such a deep sleep that she couldn't even hear my banging for help. I was extremely relieved to see she was okay. Absolutely nothing was missing from my room. To me, the culprit was pretty obvious. Our pervy jockey host. I suspect he must have fled when he heard my friends coming back. The others didn't see anyone. Needless to say, we all got the hell out of there and took up in a hotel for the rest of the trip. When I next went online to warn others in a review, the listing on Airbnb had mysteriously disappeared. To this day, I wonder whether the host had somehow planned for that door to jam, like some sort of trap. I also wonder what would have happened if my girlfriend had returned instead of me, or if he had simply realized Helena was alone in the other room. I was 16 years old when this happened, and still at school in Osaka. While there, one particular classmate of mine always caught my attention. A beautiful girl with chocolate-coloured hair and big, bright eyes. Her name was Suzumi. Not only was she really good-looking, but she was kind and smart too. A triple whammy. Needless to say, I had the biggest of crushes on her. Problem was, I could never muster up the courage to ask her out, since there were always a bunch of other guys swooning around her, desperately peacocking for her attention. Now, I wasn't an ugly guy per se, but I wasn't exactly a stud either. So, you can imagine my surprise when she sat beside me one lunchtime and asked if I wanted to go to the beach with her on the weekend. Like, an actual date. I couldn't believe my luck. There was no way I was gonna say no to that. It was a dream come true when we finally made our relationship official. For a while, everything was great. But as the weeks went by, a different side of her started to rise to the surface. She didn't like me hanging around with my best friend. He was another guy, a gay guy called Jiro. For whatever reason, she thought he had a crush on me. I assured her that wasn't the case at all. Jiro and I had been best buds since we were small kids, and we thought of each other like brothers. Besides that, I wasn't that way inclined in the slightest. I made all of this very clear, and told her how much I loved her and to stop overanalyzing things. The mid-semester break rolled around, and Suzume started becoming extremely possessive. Jiro's parents were out of the country on an extended holiday, so our whole group of friends used his house as a sort of hangout pad. Occasionally, a girl or two would join us too. Suzumi hated that I went to these events. She was irked by the fact I wouldn't spend every waking moment with her, and couldn't understand why I might want to just chill with my friends occasionally. If the focus wasn't 100% on her, then her sweet and innocent demeanor would melt away, and she'd turn vicious and spiteful. She would even start to get mad when I paid my cat attention instead of her. This was starting to get out of hand, and honestly, Suzumi was starting to become more of a hassle than she was worth. I told Jiro and the guys about it, and they all suggested I cut things off with her. It took a little longer for that to fully sink in. This was my first girlfriend after all, and she was really hot, but nobody should have to put up with this sort of crap. As the days progressed, her neediness turned sinister. She started breaking my things to get her own way, threatened to cut herself if I wanted to see my friends. I'd sometimes even catch her following me around town when we hadn't made plans to see each other, staring at me from afar, and not even coming over to say hi. I'd call out to her, but she'd remain expressionless. Then she'd walk away and disappear into the crowd. It no longer felt like I had a girlfriend, but a stalker. I'd never been in a relationship before, but I knew this wasn't normal behavior. The final straw came when I caught her slamming my cat's tail in the door. She claimed it was unintentional, but I knew otherwise. I saw the way she eyed the poor thing before pushing the door as forcefully as she could, probably hoping to do more damage than she did. She was jealous of a cat. I ended things right then and there, and told her to get the hell out of my house. There were some tears, but thankfully she left without much resistance. I took my cat to the vet's, and he ended up having to have his tail amputated. I had kept Suzumi's craziness a secret from my family for the whole time we dated, and decided to keep things that way. I guess I felt sorry for her. I just said that I had accidentally stepped on the cat's tail. After that, I didn't see Suzumi again for the rest of the break. That didn't stop her from constantly messaging me on social media sites and by text. Her messages were mostly pleas for forgiveness. Others were the complete opposite, telling me how she'd make me see the error of my ways and how I'd regret leaving her. They were the ravings of a lunatic. I ignored each one. The mid-semester break came to an end, and I was sort of nervous about how things would go on the first day back at school. Suzume was a lot more popular than I was. Was she going to start spreading gossip, painting me as the bad guy? I had no idea. Whatever the case, my small group of friends and I knew the truth. That underneath Suzume's perfect exterior, there was a stone-cold bitch, nuts beyond belief. I sat there in class on that Monday morning, hoping that Jiro would come in before Suzumi. One by one, people started to enter, but 2 desks remained empty. There was no sign of either Suzumi or Jiro. On top of that, Jiro wasn't responding to my calls or texts. That wasn't like him. Well, perhaps he had an early morning dentist's appointment or something. No. The whole day, Jiro was absent from school, and I couldn't get a hold of him. My suspicion got the better of me, and that evening, I decided to visit his house. When I arrived, his house was surrounded by police tape. 2 police cars were outside, and a couple of officers were standing by the front door. I asked them what the hell was going on, but was told that it was a private matter. I told them that the kid who lived inside was a close friend of mine, and demanded an answer. They kept silent, and one of them told me to go home, said that I shouldn't stick around. Well, I was a stubborn young man, and so as long as I kept my distance from the property, there wasn't anything they could do to get rid of me. from inside the house, I could hear the occasional female scream, like a wailing sound. I couldn't work out if they were angry, or scared, or heartbroken. Regardless, each time one rang out, my heart sank in my chest. What on earth was going on inside? Had Jiro's parents come home early, and some sort of domestic incident taken place? Had there been an accident? I waited until 2 cops came out, dragging a chocolate-haired girl by her arms, her hands cuffed. She struggled and screamed before looking up for a means of escape. That's when her eyes met mine. Suzume. Her bright eyes that I had once fallen for had turned dull. They began to water. She dropped her head in shame, avoiding my stare. Without even thinking, I ran up to her, desperate to find out what was going on. I was pushed aside by one of the cops as they forced her into the squad car. "I'll be back soon. Don't think about running off with a slut, or she'll die too," she said quietly, as if only I could hear it. As if what she had just said was completely normal and everyday. Before I could respond, the car door was slammed shut. An ambulance arrived not long after. 2 medics rushed inside the house. I remained in the same spot, refusing to move. I wish that I had. Rolled out on a board, pale-faced and with dead eyes, was Jiro. He had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. Another officer inside had been working on saving his life, but it was no use. Suzume had been holding him hostage in his own home. She got the idea that Jiro was behind our breakup, and not her own crazy actions. Marks on Jiro's body suggested that he had been bound and tortured. When a female friend of his dropped by and saw what was going on, she ran for her life and called the cops. Rather than leave things there and surrender herself to the police, Suzume decided to finish the job. It took them so long to get her out of the house because she was threatening to kill herself too. My biggest regret is not telling people what had happened when she broke my cat's tail. Remorselessly hurting animals is a warning sign of a psychopath. As of right now, Suzume is behind bars. She managed to escape the death penalty because of her age, and the fact that there was only one victim. She'll probably only spend around 15 more years in prison before getting out on parole. If she ever does fulfill her promise, if she ever does come back for me, I'll kill her myself. This took place in my home country, on a family farm in the great outdoors. I have an aunt on my father's side of the family. She was childless, even after 10 plus years of marriage, and this bothered her greatly. On top of that, she and her husband were always curt towards one another. So, after a while, it became a sort of open secret in my family that my uncle had a girl on his farm, a mistress who he had been seeing behind my aunt's back. This mistress was a lower caste farm worker and his keep. They would stay at her hut, and eventually had a baby daughter together. They were able to keep the child a secret for 2 years before my aunt found out. Now, my aunt was always a bit unhinged, so when she heard the news that her husband had decided to marry the young farmhand and give their daughter his official name, she went crazy. She hired professional hitmen called Ramoshis and told them to break into the young girl's hut at night and kill everyone there. Well, Ramoshis don't kill children, so to finish the job, she turned up at the site, and while the Ramoshis killed the girl, her younger sister, her mother, and her father, my aunt strangled the 2-year-old child in her sleep. Somehow, someone saw the Ramoshis running away from the crime scene, and were able to identify my aunt with them. After a prolonged court hearing, in which my family lost most of their resources, my aunt was found guilty, and was given a life sentence. This was over 25 years ago now, back when my mother was pregnant with me. I'd never even seen this aunt in my entire life. However, I've always been told how much I look like her. She was one of the most good-looking women in our family, so I guess people say it as a compliment. She'll be out of jail in September of this year. She's been told that one of her nieces looks just like her, and apparently she's very interested in meeting me. Fuck my life. I've always had really intense, vivid dreams ever since I was a kid. At least once every week, I wake up and remember pretty much everything I dreamt during the night. The scenarios in the dreams vary, but there's a few recurring ones. Some pleasant, some less so. But one thing that links a lot of them together is this one character who frequently appears. I have no idea who he is, but I can picture his face in my head as if he were my own brother. He's always been the same age as me. When I was a kid, so was he, and now that I'm 28, he's a grown man in my dreams too. It's unmistakably the same guy every time. Tan skin, shaggy, unkempt hair, piercing eyes. I read somewhere online that your mind can't make up new faces by itself while you're asleep. You have to have actually seen the person in the flesh at some point, maybe just passed them in the street. Anyway, 2 weeks ago, I was out of state at a gas station. While I'm inside waiting to pay, some guy busts in with a gun in his hand, screaming at the clerk to open up the register and threatening to blow our fucking heads off. I'm backing away with my hands in full view, terrified out of my mind. The clerk is shakily pulling the cash out for the guy. The robber glances at my face and does a double take. Now, staring at me, the colour almost seems to drain away from his face. I knew what was going through his head. It was the same thing that was going through mine. Recognition and confusion. This was unmistakably him. That guy I'd been dreaming about for years. My partner in crime from my dreams. He brings the gun up and aims it at me, and in that moment I knew I was fucking finished. I just knew it. He holds the gun there, then brings it back down to his side, the same shocked expression stuck on his face. He takes what's on the side already and doesn't bother demanding any more. He just quick steps out of there. I have no idea what that was all about, though I've been racking my brain since the incident. How the hell did we both know each other? Did the two of us meet in our past lives? Will we meet again? Is this just some freaky coincidence and I'm reading too much into it? I literally have no idea. I'm just thankful I hadn't been dreaming about the face of my future killer for all those years. The guy was caught on the station's CCTV. They're still out looking for him. I lived in Menifee, California, for about over 3 years. During that time, I went to the local high school, and let me just say that a lot of crazy stuff went down while I attended. One time, a library employee showed up to school very early in the morning and shot herself in her car. The body was discovered during second period. What creeps me out most of all was that I passed by her car while I was walking to school that morning and didn't even notice it. Another time, an undercover cop posing as a student was able to identify kids that were selling narcotics, and shortly after, a huge drug bust ensued. Strangely enough, on the same day that happened, while I was walking to school, some guy I knew asked if I wanted to buy pot off him, which I wisely declined. Later on, I saw that same guy get arrested and escorted out of my classroom. If you've ever seen 21 Jump Street, the event itself closely mirrored that. Pretty awesome. However, the one event that was probably the biggest and shook the entire community was the disappearance and death of a local boy named Terry Dwayne Smith Jr. The tragedy happened during the summer after the 2013 school year. I didn't know who the boy was, but I did know his older brother, Skylar. I knew Skylar from school. He was in my first period English class at the time. I didn't talk to him much, even though he sat near me, but on the times that I did say a word to him, he was friendly. He came off as a little bit odd, but I personally didn't think he was really that strange. He had his own group of friends who were really easy to get along with. Something of note that did happen early on in the school year was a confrontation he got in. I remember hearing about how this one guy said something offensive to Skylar, which in turn greatly angered him, and it all erupted into a fight. The kid's front tooth got knocked out. At the time, it seemed funny to everyone else, but it was an indicator of how far Skylar was willing to go when it came to getting agitated. Anyways, on to the main story. After school ended that year, I spent most of the summer just hanging out with my trio of friends. One day, I was in my room doing nothing of interest, so I decided to go on Facebook. While on there, Skylar posted something that appeared on my newsfeed. He said his little brother had gone missing and was urging his friends to be on the lookout for his whereabouts. I found it pretty unfortunate, but thought the kid would probably be found the same day. Either that day or the next, I forget which, I happened to be watching the news, and the number one topic was the disappearance of a boy named Terry. A picture of him was then put up. On closer examination, I noticed he was the same boy that Skylar had posted about earlier. Apparently, the situation had gotten dire, and the brother's mother, Shauna, had called for a group effort to go and search for the boy. As the days went on, more and more people went out in search of young Terry. I believe Skylar made a few more posts about it, but I could be wrong. Eventually, he was made a suspect and was taken into custody by the police because he was the last person to see Terry alive before he went missing. I remember hearing about how a lot of his friends were in denial and disbelief. To them, he could never do such a thing. Since I personally didn't know Skylar that well, I couldn't really pass judgment at the time. While in custody, Skylar changed his story several times about his last encounter with his brother, his main one being that they were both home alone, and he decided to leave and go and hang out with his friends, and that supposedly Terry had followed him for a while, until Skylar told him he couldn't tag along and ordered him to return home. This set up his theory that Terry was probably abducted by someone that night. Finally, after several days of searching, Terry's body was eventually discovered behind the family home, under a tree in a shallow grave. The general consensus at the time was that Skylar did kill his brother for unknown reasons, and tried to bury him. Some even thought that the mother was in on it, because she was still in defense of Skylar, who was then charged with the crime. Shauna acted pretty strangely, saying that Terry had autism, and that supposedly at first she didn't let the cops investigate her property. After the corpse was discovered, the huge search party was promptly called off, and a candlelight vigil was held for Terry. In the aftermath, a lot of drama ensued. Terry's father came into town from the other side of the country and claimed that his ex-wife had lied about their son having autism and demanded to take his body back with him to be buried in his local area. He even sued Shauna for a large amount of money. I think it was for child negligence or for emotional distress. The two even appeared and debated on the Dr. Phil show, but nothing came out of that besides what everyone already knew. Since at the time Skylar was a minor, he wasn't charged as an adult. He was found guilty of manslaughter, but was offered a plea deal, the details of which have not been released to the public. Apparently, what actually happened was that the brothers were roughhousing when Terry was accidentally killed. Their mother later suggested something like the boy hitting his head on the corner of a table. In a panic, Skylar tried to bury him in the backyard. What was strange was that knowing what had happened, Skylar still went to Facebook and asked for help in searching for his brother instead of just confessing. Skylar was sentenced to 12 years and will still be in juvenile detention until he's 23. Overall, this was pretty tragic, and it's crazy how one day I was just talking to this guy in class, and the next he's on the news for his own brother's murder. Links to the case can be found in the description below. I've been a long-time stalker of this page, and I have a story of my own that still haunts me to this day. Let me set the scene for you. I was 7 years old, currently 25, and my mother was dating a man who had a daughter who was around 15. Her name was Christy. While she didn't live with us, she did stay with us some weekends. The reason this is important will come into play a little later. I grew up in a moderately isolated area in the south. My mother's house is on about 90 acres, most of it being heavily wooded. For the most part, it was quiet, the type of place most people don't even lock their doors, and everyone knows each other. It was quiet, until one sequence of events shook my community to its core. There was a man, just 2 streets over from mine, who murdered his girlfriend and her entire family in their home over a dinner, just 2 weeks before this event took place. It was also learned later that he had also murdered his mother and father in their home, as they were found after his girlfriend's family was. He hadn't been caught, and the local police had been working with cops in Tennessee, as there had been reports of people sighting him there. My mother had gotten a security system installed, just to ensure our home was properly secured. We had alarms on every window and door in our house. On this Saturday, my mother got called into work, as she was an apartment manager, and there was an emergency she needed to tend to. Her boyfriend had gone to work early that morning. Now, my mother was very, very nervous about leaving, and due to the nature of the emergency, she thought it was best that Christy and I stayed at home where we were safe. Safe, so she thought. She reluctantly left, and let us know that her cell phone was always going to be on if we needed her. Christy and I promptly set the alarms and made sure all of the windows and doors were locked. My mother had been gone about an hour, and we were deep into a movie on Disney, eating pizza. Suddenly, the alarm started blaring. Christy and I jumped up to see what was going on. On the way to the alarm, you have to pass a very large, sliding glass door. What we saw there left us frozen. There was a man prying our door open with a crowbar. He saw us, made eye contact, and quickly ran off into the woods behind my mother's house. I'll never forget what he looked like, or the sinister look he had in his eyes. We called the police, and then we called my mother, who had already been alerted by the alarm company. My mother actually arrived before the police did, due to how isolated we really were. When we described the man to the police, they immediately knew this was the man they were looking for. Of course, there was a massive investigation that day of the property and the woods that surrounded us. In the woods, they found cigarette butts, lots of canned food, soda bottles, and a makeshift tent made from a tarp. The man had been living behind us the entire time, and even stealing food from our trash. When he was arrested, which was a few hours after the incident, he had admitted to watching our family to learn our habits, knowing that he could take advantage of the house when no one was there. Even now, as an adult, this event still follows me. Just goes to show, you never really know who's watching you. Not much is known about skinwalkers, other than the obvious, since the Navajo generally don't like to talk about them. It's said that even discussing the creatures attracts their attention, though I think their reluctance has more to do with not letting outsiders in on their native lore. That being said, a part Navajo friend of mine has filled me in on some of the stories he's heard about the creatures, and quite frankly, they're pretty chilling. He's mostly apathetic when it comes to the whole native secrecy deal. He told us a story that happened to his uncle when he was only 21 and out on a camping trip with a few buddies of his. It was an annual trip they made to honor a friend of theirs who died young a couple of years prior. For the sake of this story, we'll say the friend's name was Jeremy. The rest of the guys had ventured out to those woods every year. Even with Jeremy having passed away, they kept the tradition very much alive. It was early one morning during the trip, and my friend's uncle had woken up before his buddies. He got out of the tent to take a little stroll around the area, stretch his legs, and appreciate the beautiful nature that surrounded him. He walks for about 5 minutes, and other than his friends, he's miles away from the closest human beings around. He's hearing nothing but birdsong and the breeze. But the calm atmosphere suddenly shifts, and the air around him started to feel heavy. The sound of the birds around him seemed to dissipate, and things became eerily and unusually silent. A strange sense of dread overcame him, and compelled him to turn around. There, standing on a raised area, was Jeremy. More accurately, it was Jeremy's face, seemingly superimposed on a weird, crooked body. He just stood there, waving at him. Looking at Jeremy's face closely, his jaw was slack, and his eyes were colourless and glazed over, like there was a thin, translucent film covering them. His expression never changed. His limbs were torn and bloody. My friend's uncle sprinted back to the tent and alerted the others. They knew the stories of skinwalkers, and wasted no time in packing up and cutting their trip short. Now, some people might be compelled to think that this was Jeremy's spirit, coming to hang out with his old camping buddies one last time. My friend's uncle knows otherwise. He says this was a malevolent entity. It was likely native to the area, and had seen the boys on a previous trip. That's how it knew to take Jeremy's face. Finding love in Japan can be tough these days. The media here says that more and more young people are suffering from sekusu shinai shokugan. That pretty much translates into celibacy syndrome. Basically, no one's getting laid anymore. Half of all young people aren't in a relationship, and they pretty much all plan on staying that way. They just seem to find the whole thing bothersome. A year ago, I considered myself to be in the other half. I was a relatively attractive 24-year-old guy with a decent job. At the risk of sounding cocky, I thought I had a lot going for me, so it frustrated me that I hadn't had a girlfriend since high school. Trust me, that wasn't from lack of trying. There's a number of services in my country designed to fill this romantic void. You can hire yourself a girlfriend who'll walk around holding your hand in public, or you can even go to a cuddle cafe where you can pay a girl to just lay beside you and, like the name suggests, cuddle you. Nintendo even makes virtual girlfriend games. Oh, the wonders of technology. These solutions weren't for me though. I wanted the real deal, a proper relationship. A co-worker of mine, Goro, told me about this speed dating night that was coming up. Said that he was going, and that I should sign up too. Well, it sounded like it could be a fun time. And what did I really have to lose? For those of you who don't know how a speed dating night works, here's a quick rundown. A bunch of single men and women turn up to the event. All the women go and sit at a table by themselves, and all of the men get told which one to sit with. Then a 3-minute timer starts. In that time, you either have a nice chat, or you sit there in awkward silence. Hopefully not the latter. Once time's up, a bell rings, and you move on to the next girl's table. Once everybody's had a 3-minute date with all of the other members of the opposite sex, you all mark down on a piece of paper who you'd be interested in seeing again. At the end, some matches are made. Some will get lucky, and some not so much. It was the night of the event, and to be honest, I was feeling pretty confident. I put on my best clothes, sprayed on some cologne, and practiced a few lines in the mirror before setting out. Good guy Goro came by and gave me a ride. Not only were we co-workers, but we had been friends since high school as well. Goro loved chasing after the girls at the clubs and bars, but always had limited success. Unfortunately for Goro, he was on the shorter and chubbier side. Imagine a Japanese Danny DeVito. I hope the night would go well for him. The speed dating gets underway, and to start with, things are going great. It's about halfway through the night, and there haven't been any uncomfortable silences or anything. There was Akane, the bubbly young Tokyo girl who had moved here for work. Honoka, this hot intelligent chick with a great body. Yumi, this more alternative girl with bleach blonde hair, pale skin, and a really cute smile. And then I got to Kyoko. As I sat down, I thought there was something strangely familiar about her, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. She was pretty average looking, so maybe she just reminded me of someone else I knew. Hey, how's it going? I'm Shin.
I know. I'm Kyoko. Nice to meet you.
I know. Well, I did have a name tag on, but that was still pretty weird. Other than that, things started well enough, with her doing most of the talking. Well, all of the talking really. She spoke so fast and incoherently, it made listening to it all almost impossible. One thing did stand out though.
But you can check it out when they show it on TV sometime. How's working at Takata anyway? It must be interesting. Oh my god, have you ever seen Nuburo's? They do great seafood there.
Wait, what the hell? Takata? How did she know what company I worked for? Had I let that slip somehow? Goro was yet to see this girl, so there's no way he could have mentioned it. I would have asked her if she'd given me time to respond, but she just moved on to more incessant talking. I sat there politely, until the 3-minute timer released me from that purgatory. I stood up, said my nice to meet yous, and moved on to the next table. I did a lot worse the rest of that evening, distracted by the fact that Kyoko girl kept staring at me, like this unblinking, penetrating stare. Once all of the dates were over, I met back up with Goro. Hey bro, did you recognize her? Huh? I didn't know what he was talking about. That girl, Kyoko, from our high school. Man, I can't believe how much she's changed. Kyoko. I honestly couldn't place her in my head. The name rang a bell, sure, but Kyoko is common, and our school was pretty big. She must have really changed. I guess that's why I thought she seemed familiar, though. Mystery solved. Goro continued. Yeah man, she's really blossomed. She wasn't really into me, though. Pff, what a jib. So Kyoko knew me from school, huh? Maybe I had her on Facebook and had forgotten all about her. That could explain how she knew where I worked. But if that's the case, why wouldn't she have mentioned knowing me from school? Ah well, she wasn't really my thing anyway. I marked her down as a non-match on my card and forgot all about it. Put it down to being one of those weird things, and figured I'd never see her again. Goro might not have been so lucky at the event, but I ended up getting a few matches, and actually went on a few more dates with some of the girls. Of all of them, I got along with Yumi the best. She was the one with dyed blonde hair. Pretty unusual for a Japanese chick, but she could pull it off really well. On our third date, we're eating dinner in a restaurant together. We'd just finished our main course, and were laughing and slightly drunk on sake, when I noticed one of the other diners on a far table from us. They were half hiding behind a menu. It was that Kyoko girl, sitting by herself and staring over at us, doing her best to remain unseen. I mentioned it to Yumi, who subtly glanced over to look at her. Well, she confirmed it definitely was the same Kyoko girl from the speed dating night, and made a joke about how she was probably following us around town. It was funny at first, but by the time our desserts came out, she was still just sitting there, totally alone, staring at us from behind her menu. Okay, either she was really indecisive about what she wanted to eat, or she's keeping a watch on us for some reason. I decided to go over and say something to her, but as I stood up to do so, she leapt up and ran out of the restaurant. That was unexpected. Still, the night went on. Yumi came back to my place for some coffee, and ended up staying the night. I was really starting to fall for this girl. Coffee started becoming a regular occurrence, and it wasn't long before Yumi and I made our relationship official. The whole speed dating thing had actually paid off. No virtual girlfriends for me, thank God. One evening, Goro called me up and asked Yumi and I on a double date sort of thing. Said that one of the girls from the speed dating night was interested in him after all, and had suggested going to see a movie at the cinema. Some corny rom-com. Well, I wanted to help a brother out, so I agreed. When we arrived, Goro was standing there with, you guessed it, Kyoko. "Hey bro, check it out. Our blast from the past, huh?" Goro said, taking me to one side. "Bet you never saw this one coming, huh? Me bagging a hot babe like this?" I guess Goro thought he'd surprise me with his date being Kyoko. Well, I was certainly surprised. Neither Yumi or I knew what to say. We kinda just stood there, awkwardly. Kyoko smiled at me.
Good to see you again, Shin.
Yeah. Hey. She would not take her eyes off me, and acted like Yumi and Goro weren't there at all, even when they tried to talk to her. As we shuffled into the theatre, Kyoko made sure that Goro didn't sit next to me, and that she did. This was just too weird. It was clear that Kyoko had set this whole thing up, and got Goro to ask me along with them. I guess little Goro took over the thinking for a while, and he just went along with the plans in hopes of getting laid. During the trailers for the movie, I gave Yumi a nudge, and we both uncomfortably made our getaway before Kyoko could ask any questions. This was just the tip of the iceberg. For the next week, Yumi kept telling me that she had seen Kyoko following her around town, glaring at her with hatred in her eyes. Honestly, I was worried that Yumi might leave me, simply because she was scared of Kyoko's obsession. I suppose that was Kyoko's plan. This whole thing came to a climax on one weekend night. Yumi and I had been out for a few drinks, and came back to my place to spend the night. I put the key in the lock to open the front door to my apartment, but I needn't have bothered. The door just swung open. I'd forgotten to lock the bloody thing before setting out. That was so unlike me. Thankfully, nothing was missing or out of place, and I just cursed my stupidity. We stayed up pretty late that night, fooling around, and before sleeping, Yumi went upstairs to use the bathroom. In the meantime, I laid my head on the pillow to rest my eyes. Then, the sound of footsteps entered the dark bedroom. That was quick, I thought to myself, too tired to open my eyes. I waited for Yumi to hop into bed beside me. But she didn't. She just stood there, breathing heavily. "Yumi? What are you doing, baby?" I whispered tiredly. Then, in a soft reply,
It's Kyoko.
my muscles locked up. With a racing heart, I opened my eyes to see a silhouette at the foot of my bed. I couldn't make out many details.
Are you awake?
Yeah, no fucking shit I am. What the hell are you playing at? How the hell did you get in here?
The landlady let me in. I've been waiting for you to get back.
She flicked the light switch on the wall behind her, and the room lit up. I could see Kyoko now. There, in a thin nightgown, like she was ready for bed. What made my stomach churn, though, was the thing in her right hand. It was a knife. What the fuck is this? Get the hell out before I call the cops!
Shh.
Kyoko continued to take unnecessarily deep breaths, like she was gasping for air or something.
Why do you keep ignoring me, Shin?
I haven't been ignoring you. Just put down the knife and tell me what this is all about, huh?
It's about this. Why do you always act so weird around me? It's like you never want me around. I don't get it. I show you nothing but love, and get this in return?
This girl was living on another planet. It's like she really thought we were in a relationship because of that 3-minute date we had, and she thought I was cheating on her or something. This was a total shock to my system, and I was struggling to process what was actually happening. It was like I had woken up in a nightmare. As I sat there on my bed, keeping a close eye on the blade she was flailing around, I heard the toilet upstairs flush. Yumi.
Your new girl's very pretty,
She said, cradling the knife.
Tell me, Shin, is she really so much prettier than me?
I was terrified about what Kyoko might do to Yumi given half the chance. I heard my girlfriend's footsteps moving upstairs, and her concerned voice calling out my name. She had clearly heard the commotion.
Well, we can change that.
Kyoko turned her back to me and stepped towards the door. This insane bitch was going for Yumi. There was no way in hell I was just going to sit back like a coward. With Kyoko's back to me, I decided to take my chances. I leapt from my bed and charged, slamming the full weight of my body into her. She screamed, I guess not expecting me to attack her. I flew downwards onto Kyoko, the blade in her hand slicing a deep gash into my leg. But I didn't care. The adrenaline masked the pain. I held her pinned down, restraining her hand with the knife as best I could, and screamed for Yumi to get out of the apartment, to run to one of the neighbors' places and call the police. When she realized what was happening, she followed my instructions and ran to Old Lady Bankai's place next door. Once I was sure Yumi was safe, I let go of Kyoko. The deep wound in my leg was giving me trouble, and starting to make me feel lightheaded. I left Kyoko there, not caring if she was hurt badly or not, and hobbled next door to wait for the police. By the time they showed up, Kyoko had fled. It didn't take them long to track her down though. She was hardly a master criminal after all, just a delusional young woman. Before escaping, she had stolen one of my combs and some items of clothing from my wash basket. Little keepsakes, I suppose. As it turns out, Kyoko had been obsessed with me since high school, an obsession that hadn't faltered over the years. Apparently, I'd caught her eye back then, and she had been stalking me on and off ever since, monitoring my movements at work and in my spare time, collecting as much information as possible about me. She was so ordinary looking, I never even noticed her. On the night of the speed dating, she decided to take things up a level and make her move. I suppose she thought she might somehow impress me by already knowing where I worked, or that I'd be flattered by the fact that she'd done her research. The fact that I didn't mark her down as someone I'd like to see again didn't deter her. I'm still not sure how she knew I was going to that event. What I do know is this. She had watched me long enough to learn the entrance code to my apartment complex. She had spent the last few weeks convincing my landlady that she was in fact my girlfriend. After gaining her trust, she came by on the night of the incident, got my landlady to let her in by pretending she had lost her key, and then hid in my apartment, waiting for me to get back. Kyoko had planned on disfiguring Yumi that night. Perhaps worse. Unbelievably, Kyoko only received a suspended sentence, and was allowed back on the streets immediately after sentencing. Neither Yumi or I could believe it. We did manage to get a restraining order though, which seems to have convinced her to stay away from us. We haven't seen or heard from her for the past year. Recently, I checked on Kyoko's social media profiles. Looking through old pictures of her online, I remembered who she was from school. This quiet, mild-mannered girl. It's always the ones you never suspect. She's currently living in Tokyo, and seems to be just as deranged as she was back then. Good luck out there, guys. I work at my local county animal shelter. Done it for a few years. While you do see a lot of fucked up shit that would probably send you into a fit of rage, you also get to channel that rage into helping lots of awesome critters. It's pretty much what I was meant for. The block is set up like one winding stretch of county buildings. Basically, there's everything on this block from doctors to the homeless shelter. Needless to say, this block has some interesting characters. No biggie. I live in a pretty shit area, so crazy stuff happens all the time. Last year, right in front of me, someone jumped out of their car and stabbed another person in traffic. Didn't even make the news. Took the cops almost 30 minutes to get there. Back on track. My job lets me bring my dog to work, which is awesome. He just hangs out with me, or gets put into a doggy playgroup with his friends, depending on my day's activity levels. He's super nice to everyone, but can be a little intimidating to some people at first. It's understandable. He's a 95-pound Doberman, and they get a bit of a bad rap. So a few days ago, I was up in the front office on my own, since my coworker was on a break. 2 guys come in. Right off the bat, I'm like, damn, these dudes are high as a kite. Well, whatever. Happens. We're located next to a large college. It's to be expected. Anyway, one of the dudes starts asking about volunteering because he has some community service hours due for some law breaking he did, and I point him in the direction of the coordinator who deals with that. He goes, and the other guy stays and starts making idle conversation. What's my name? My birthday? Favorite color? He also compliments my tattoos and asks if I got them all for my birthday. I don't know. This town's weird, so I don't question too much anymore. Then, out of nowhere, he starts telling me how hot I am and asks for my last name. I had to give my first because it's engraved on my shirt, but I lied about my last name. I should have just told him I wasn't comfortable with giving my last name out, but of course I have too nice syndrome, and honestly didn't want to be harassed further by saying no, which I have in the past. So the other guy comes back. They leave, and I take my break. Lo and behold, not 10 minutes into my break, I get a text from my coworker that the other guys came back looking for me, and not to come back into work. They apparently leave 20 minutes later. Phew, in the clear. So fast forward. Day's pretty much done, just closing up shop. A different coworker to the one I work up front with comes over and sees that I'm hurrying to leave. He asks me if I want him to take my dog out to a yard we have, let him do his business. I appreciate it and agree. My coworker also says he'll put my dog in my car too, since it's parked next to his, and he doesn't mind. He has the night shift to watch the animals, so he's got some time to chill. He's also my homie and knows my routine. I say sure, since I have a few binders to take out anyway, and I hand him my keys. He goes off with my dog and brings my keys back about 15 minutes later. Besides that guy, I'm the last to leave for the night. It's about 8 and already dark here, and the parking lot we have is so small that employees have to find street parking. That's a whole other level of shit. As I'm about halfway to my car, probably a 5-minute walk away, I can hear some low talking and footsteps coming behind me. It doesn't ring any alarm bells at first. Lots of buildings and stuff on this street, and some homeless people mill about later at night, but they're pretty harmless, so I just keep on trucking. Not that many steps later, I hear the steps behind me speed up, and feel a hand touch my shoulder. The hand stopped me so abruptly, I end up dropping my binders with loose papers I just organized. I turn and freeze when I see it's the 2 guys from earlier. "Did you need something?" I ask, as a sinking feeling set in. "I just wanted to know why you lied to my brother here about your name. You like one of those stuck-up bitches who thinks they're too good?" asked the guy who wanted to volunteer. I stood there with my mouth like a fucking flytrap, no idea how he knew I lied. The other guy answered that for me. He told me he found me on Facebook from searching my work. I came up with the smoothest lie I could, and said that I'm not allowed to give my full name to customers for county law safety regulations. That's total bullshit, but they looked like they believed it. While I'm saying all of this, I see his hand resting on his pocket, and I subtly take in that they both have decent-sized pocket knives halfway concealed. I carry one myself for work, in case an animal ever gets caught on a leash or something, but I'm a 21-year-old girl. I'm 5'2" and 100 pounds. I'm not gonna be able to do shit to these guys if it comes to it. I know that much. So now, I'm wanting to fucking cry, while the volunteer guy's going on about how it's good I'm not stuck up, because they don't like stuck-up bitches, and think they should all be taught a lesson in mannerisms. I'm trying to think how to get the fuck out. No one's around, and I don't want to use my phone to call 911 in front of them. I'm almost to my car, so I don't want to risk going back to work. The guy who's got the hots for me is staring at me like a damn Christmas ham, so I want to puke. Then, they tell me about this party they're going to, and that I should come since I'm a good girl, and good girls go to parties with them. The way volunteer guy said it made it like an order and not a request, and the hairs on the back of my neck went up. I get an idea while he's talking, and just pray to the almighty it's going to fucking work. I force a relaxed smile and agree, saying I just have to put my binders in my car or my boss will kill me. They look stoked at my agreement, and proceeded to follow me to my car. It's too dark to see inside the windows, and streetlights are a rare thing on this side of town. I get to the back door of my car, open it, and I smile when I see my dog's head pop up from the trunk out of his slumber. Before I even make a sound, his ears go back and he starts growling. I hear a "what the fuck is that?" come from behind me, and that's all it took for my dog to get his ass up and lunge at them, doing his best to get his large body between me and the door. I grab his collar and let him jump out of the car. Let me tell you, he's going nuts. He's got drool flying out of his mouth, and he's snapping and barking and growling something scary. The guys back up, start telling me that we can't bring a dog to the party, and to put the fucking deranged mutt back in the car. I hold back from rolling my eyes and apologize, saying I'm just gonna give him some dog food that I keep in my glove box. I shut the back door and open the front. My dog won't get in, just keeps growling and snapping at the two guys. So I keep a hold of his collar, and I get in the driver's side first, then call him in. Thankfully, he reluctantly follows. I shut it as soon as his ass is on the passenger seat, hit the lock doors button, and turn on my car. As soon as I do that, they know I'm not about to go to some party with their dumbasses, and start to bang on my window. My dog goes into rage mode, and hops in the back, and starts going ballistic, while I peel the fuck out of there, really not caring if I hit one of them or not. Once I'm down the street a bit, I see them in my rearview mirror, just staring at my car. I took the opposite direction in which I normally go home, just to make myself feel better, even though I have an hour commute home. As soon as I get back, I deactivate my Facebook. I told my boss the next day over the phone, and they're working on transferring me to one of our other 2 shelters in the county. So, if those 2 creepy drug guys are listening, I just want you to know that my dog goes everywhere with me, and I'm sure he'd love a second chance at you. For anyone interested in pictures of him, he's the one on the right of this picture. The other is a buddy of his. His name is Zeus, aka Zeus the Moose or Zeusy Moosey. Post 1 from 2 years ago. Apologies in advance if this isn't the right place for this, but I just need to get this off my chest. I'm also in the break room at my job on my cell phone, so forgive me if this sounds rushed. For those of you who don't know, I'm a fairly young female. In fact, I'm the youngest assistant manager at the grocery store I work at. I'm also rather petite. In our store, there's a small kiosk that sells cell phones and various services related to that. There are several different guys who rotate through this kiosk. One in particular, Bob, has weirded me out from the get-go. As soon as training was over, I started running the front of the store alone. That was when the comments started. Every time I walked by the kiosk, Bob would say something like, "Hey gorgeous, when are you gonna ditch your boyfriend and come and date me?" I can take you for a ride in my truck if you know what I mean. He also stared at me whenever he got a chance. It didn't matter if I was in customer service, the pharmacy, at the register, wherever. If I was in the front, he was staring at me. Since about December, it's gotten physical as well. He's tried holding my hand, purposely brushing by me as he walked by, and playing with my hair as I counted registers down at the end of the night. Within the last couple of weeks, he's also snuck up behind me and grabbed my waist a couple of different times, and gotten close enough that I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. He's also started showing up frequently when I work. I'd say that about 80% of my shifts, he's been there, staring, skulking. Despite me telling him multiple times to leave me alone, he hasn't got the message. And now, he's back. I had my back to the doors, and all of a sudden, I felt hands on my waist and lips on my neck. I freaked out and told another supervisor to cover the front, and I'm currently hiding in my break room, trying not to cry. Post 2, made on the 28th of January. So about 2 years ago, I posted here about a man named Bob, a guy who had been harassing me at work. He'd follow me, try to touch my hair, waist, anything he could get away with. Shortly after I posted, I was offered a promotion at the same chain, but a store across town. I gladly accepted, hoping that I could lose this creep and get on with my life. For a while, everything was good. I made my new bosses aware of the situation as a precaution. Still, they chose to continue having someone walk with me to and from my car, especially when working the night shift. Then, about a year after I started, the calls began. My customer service clerks would answer, transfer the calls to me, and when I picked up, the caller would hang up as soon as I finished my introduction. Annoying, but whatever. Lots of kids play dumb pranks like that. The calls progressed. It started with him not saying anything, then changed to, "Hey baby, do you miss me yet?" I'd just hang up. Then the calls changed. They got more menacing. "Hey sugar lips, I like your new car. Did you think you could get rid of me that easily? That's a cute top you're wearing. Bet it'd be really easy to rip off of you. I know you think you're invincible, running to your bosses. They can't stop me when you're alone." Soon after that, I saw his very distinct truck in the parking lot across the street. There's no way it wasn't him. My bosses insisted that it was just a coincidence, that we couldn't do anything since he wasn't on our property. It didn't matter though. Every time I walked to or from my car, the truck would be across the street. I knew it was Bob, but he had gotten smarter. Our cameras didn't reach far enough to see him. If you looked at the person in the driver's seat, you couldn't make out many features behind the hat, glasses and phone. I could always feel his stare piercing through the windshield. Pictures started showing up in the store's mail. At first, it was of me standing by my car, sitting with someone outside at break, or me walking to or from the store. We still couldn't officially blame Bob, though I'm sure he was the one doing it. It escalated to pictures of me counting tills, standing in the store, or talking with customers, all of them shots where he'd have to be 20 to 30 feet away, but we'd never find him on the security cameras. I became paranoid and couldn't get any work done for fear of him watching me. My bosses were wonderful and moved me to the back room, where I was away from all of the customers. One final shot came though. A picture of me in the back of the store, operating our forklift, with "Miss you, sugar lips" written across the back. Last August, I was accepted and started classes at my dream school, 2 hours away from my home. I quit my beloved job and moved, hoping that this would finally give me some freedom. A week ago, I started seeing what I think is Bob's truck, just rolling through campus. Today, I found a note on my car with a picture of me talking to my boyfriend. The note said, "Miss me, sugar lips? Don't worry, even he can't protect you." I used to be a corrections officer. At my jail, we had a non-violent criminal in lockdown. He'd been put with a violent one. The bad dude killed the other guy with a coloring pencil, put it straight through his eyeball. I was working the female facility, so I only heard all of the chatter over the radio. Speaking of eyeballs, we also had a guy pull his own one out. The worst thing I dealt with, though, were the stories when I was talking to my girls. There was this one girl that none of the other COs could stand. Let's call her Jess. She was constantly in trouble and getting put into lockdown. I had a very good rapport with her though, and occasionally she'd open up to me. I came in one day, and Jess was in a cell acting out. It turns out that her aunt, who was in the same facility, had just been sentenced to death. This woman, Margaret Allen, in case anyone's interested in looking this up, had killed a woman by cutting her throat and pouring bleach into it, as well as into her mouth. Then she buried her alive. Anyway, Jess was upset by this, and even I was like, look, that fucking bitch deserves death. You need to behave and not get into any more trouble or lose sleep over this. So she proceeded to tell me why she loved her so much. As a kid, around 6, Jess was in an apartment with a few other little cousins when some guy broke in to kill her parents. They were cooking crack at the time. Her 10-year-old cousin shoos all of the kids into a closet and tells them to keep quiet. Jess's best friend, the same age as her, hears screaming and runs out. She's also shot dead. The oldest kid wasn't able to stop her. Long story short, this aunt who had just been sentenced to death took her and all of the other kids in, kind of raised them on and off, and always made sure they were taken care of. They all lived in the same apartment complex. Those of us who aren't raised in such poverty and violence have no idea how bad kids in this country fucking have it. This took place back in 1999. I used to work in a store that developed photographs. People would drop off their disposable cameras, and I'd develop the pictures in the back room. Every so often, I'd come across some crazy stuff. Like, there'd be a normal sequence of photographs detailing a trip that a family had been on together, sort of telling a story really. And then, smack bang in the middle, there'd be a picture of the parents having sex, or the husband taking pictures of himself in the wife's clothing. One of the funnier things that popped up was a POV shot of a guy's dick in a banana peel, making it look like he was peeling the thing. As boring as the actual process of photo development is, you really never know what's gonna come out. Thankfully, at that point, I'd never come across anything that warranted police intervention, like messed up shots of kids. A real possibility in that line of work. Anyway, it was a Thursday night like any other. My girlfriend, Claire, and I both had work in the morning, so we took it easy. Ordered some takeout, watched a movie, and fell asleep pretty early. By the time I woke up, she had already left for work, but had left me a little goodbye message written in lipstick on the mirror, something she occasionally did. "See you later. You look so peaceful when you're sleeping." Cute. I didn't have to be at the store first thing, so I took the morning slow. I get to the store at 10 AM. Someone had dropped off a disposable camera at 9 AM when my boss, the store owner, had just opened up. Apparently, he was in some sort of hurry, quickly left his details and got out of the store. Said it was important that the photos be ready as soon as possible. That was my cue to get to work on them in the back. Once they'd developed, I looked through them, and this is what I found. Pictures of nature, of trees, hills, etc. Several pictures of various spots around town. A photo of a dead and mutilated dog. A shot of a man standing in front of a mirror. He was wearing an animal mask and was holding what looked like a machete. A picture of me walking down the street, taken without my knowledge. A picture of my girlfriend at her workplace, also completely oblivious. More photos of the two of us individually. A few of us together at a coffee place, the photographer's thumb covering up my face in each one. A picture of our house. A dark picture taken from inside our living room. Another from halfway up our stairs. One of our bedroom door. A picture of me and my girlfriend asleep in our bed. I shouted for my boss and co-workers and called my girlfriend and the cops immediately, making sure that she was around other people and saying that I'd be with her soon. Claire and I both refused to go back into that house until the cops had searched every nook and cranny. There'd been no signs of a break-in. The cops said you never know who the previous homeowners may have given a key to. We changed the locks, but still couldn't stay in that house any longer. We moved in with Claire's parents for a while, and not long after that, we moved. The thought of someone following us, entering our house and watching us sleep had us both paranoid for a long, long time. Nothing more ever came of it, and to my knowledge, the guy was never found. The information he'd left had been fake, and my boss could only give a loose description of the guy. Like most small stores back then, we didn't have CCTV either. Claire told me she hadn't written that message in lipstick on the mirror. She hadn't noticed it when she'd left for work that morning. The best things happen in the dark.